Jason, when you got started with Clue, what was the opening that you saw on the market?
Yeah, the background of Klue was I was running a SaaS company that was about 500 employees. We had created a bit of a market around market research online, customer intelligence. It was a competitor to a company like Qualtrics. And every time we went to talk to a prospect, they seemed to be more educated about our competitors than we were. And it was showing up, I think, in win rates where these prospects were like, interesting, your competitor does do that. And we were making these claims that were wrong. And I felt like we were losing trust with prospects as a result of, frankly, not knowing who the competitors were. So it was there that I just said to the product team, I was president of this company, and I was like, hey, product guys, we need to understand what's going on with the competitor set. So they went out and did a pile of research and built a wiki that was awesome for 2 weeks, and then it's out of date. And then, because it's out of date, the salespeople wouldn't use it. And then they said, why update it if sales isn't using it? And you kind of put all this effort into creating great content, and then it falls out of date. And so you get back to, at the time, Yammer, and now Slack, as kind of the go-to to kind of share the knowledge. And I just thought there's got to be a better way. And then you kind of look at the macro trends of every market is just way more competitive than it was. You look at the Martech stack, and I think we up to over 10,000 companies now, and 10 years ago it was 300. So I looked at all of that and then said there should be a solution to really solve this. I poked around at what the existing solutions were. They tended to be more like a searchable database, and then I have a process by which I kind of look at starting companies, and I call it 100 smart person meetings. And so I tried to beat the idea up across 100 smart people meetings, really trying to pull out the truth, because nobody wants to tell you your idea is bad. Got some hard feedback, and then ultimately decided this is something that a lot of companies need. And came into it thinking I'd have a machine learning magic button that would solve everything in one go, and then recognized it was going to be a little harder and started to take on some venture funding, and then started to build what is Klue today.
Back then, when you got started, what was the competitive landscape? You mentioned some searchable databases, but there wasn't anything quite like what Clue is today.
No, it was, a lot of competitive intel was like what a company like SEMrush would be doing. It'd be like more marketing metrics. It was very geared towards marketing. What kind of paid or search ads are they running, and how am I doing relatively? What was missing is, the millions of salespeople that were getting asked a question every day of, so how do you compare? Why are you different? Why are you better? Right? All of the brand messaging work and all of the product differentiation and all of the reasons why you choose a company, and they were getting hammered. And so I thought that's the area where we need to fix it. So build battle cards and content that took the raw intel, converted it into an insight that a salesperson could use and do it. So back then, nobody was doing that. It was really a searchable database of how am I doing on a marketing vector compared to somebody else.
So we were kind of like first to market with a product to solve this issue. Tell me about the road to first million in revenue. What tended to work right, out the gate, and what wasn't working?
Yeah. First million is freaking hard. Let me start with that. That first million is always the most challenging, but it's also the most fun because you're kind of oscillating and iterating your way to the perfect product and getting that fit. For us, it was, I didn't want to rush it. So I took it slow of what is it? And I looked at three areas. One is what's the intel we need to collect? And then second, how much do we need to convert the raw intel into some kind of insight? Like instead of the press release about the AI feature, what's that mean to the company? And then lastly, how do you present that? Should we just send them to another PowerPoint? And so in the early days, we were like everybody else, like more of a searchable database that we thought would be interesting, a tech or a Crunchbase on steroids. And then very quickly, in talking to the market, they're like, I got this thing called an inbox or a Slack channel, and everybody in the company sends me stuff around the web that is interesting. And I kind of trust my inbox a lot more than your searchable database. So we're like, well, we've got to combine those two worlds, the internal data flow with the external data. So that was our first aha of going internal data plus external data. What are your employees finding? And what could our bots find? That combination of the two, because everybody trusts humans more than they do bots, and they certainly trust their own employees more than they do, a third-party system. So that combination of internal external was the first. The second was I relied way too much on AI in the early days, thinking that I could build a magic button to convert raw intel into insight, and it turns out it's a really hard problem. So we spent millions of dollars actually of venture money to try and actually solve it, and then figured this is going to be always a human in the loop problem to solve. So we built an interface that they could easily create cards. They could move from the raw intel that connects one or two bits and create a card on their own. And then we could also have some automated cards that self update. So this mix of they could create cards, we could create cards was the second thing: ML curation and human curation. And then the last thing, which I don't know if it was the tail end of getting to a million or if it was just beyond that, was for us figuring out how do people digest this. And if they just did another deck, a PowerPoint deck, no salesperson was going to open a 17-page deck sitting on a drive. So we had to figure out how to create and chunk some of the great intel that might have lived in those decks into a different format that maybe could be embedded where those salespeople are, inside Salesforce, inside Slack, inside HighSpot, or through a Chrome extension that they could quick search. And that presentation layer became kind of the last pivot piece that now locked everything: create the intel, curate it, and then enable and distribute it. And that was really, I don't know where on the path to a million, but that first, when we linked all three of those things, it's when the market really responded.
Was the market knowledgeable about competitive intelligence? Was it did it resonate right away that, oh yes, you solved this problem that I'm very aware of, or did you need to educate the market?
Yeah, very much in education. So I think there's a lot of talk about category creation these days, and I think the market for competitive intelligence existed. It was just kind of backroom, not boardroom. It was the librarian that you kind of wanted to talk to, but not really. It wasn't strategic. And it needed kind of a reinvention or a subcategory of saying, look, it's not just about the lookup database. You got to enable different departments. The product team needs to be enabled with the content. The sales team needs to be enabled with the content. The marketing, even the HR team needs to know how they're competing against Amazon and Microsoft from a salary and compensation standpoint or a culture standpoint. So every department was kind of doing it, and we recognized that we just needed to tie it all together and maybe brand it differently. So we keep using the term competitive enablement. That's not necessarily a Klue term. A lot of people have started to adopt that, but it's saying, look, there's this searchable database, competitive intelligence, and there's this thing called sales enablement or revenue enablement or CS enablement or DevOps, and that's all enabling your team with the right type of intel. So let's combine those. Let's call that competitive enablement. And that's what's starting to resonate for folks. It's making it actionable, usable, not just sitting in a deck, not just sitting in a database that one person has access to. So lots of education on the market,
Can
still
you
ongoing.
offer some specifics here? So, what did you do to educate the market? Like, was it webinars, events, typical
Yeah.
things, anything
Yeah.
different?
So we leaned heavy into content. And so you'll see competitive enablement podcast. We actually did our first competitive enablement conference. We thought maybe 50 people might show up. We had 1,500 registrations to that. It was quite a successful, first time event. We started to talk and shape what job postings would look like and started to share that with people. A lot of people were like, how do I hire for this? And we started to say, well, these are the things that we see needed, and actually started to create connections for people, like help people find jobs, to the point where I think we're going to launch a job board to help people actually kind of move between companies. So classic kind of growth content marketing work where we just said, focus on what it means to do a great job, to do competitive, not necessarily bragging about Klue, but just what is competitive. So we gave away what it means to build a battle card, what it means to actually create great content, what it means to have a seat at the table, what it means to kind of filter it through and just push that out in content. And it took many years for that to get soaked up into whether it's organic search or just the vernacular for people and companies. But now it's starting to flywheel. And now we're adding paid on top of that. But lots of content focused on category, not Klue.
Today, talking about category, when I opened up the competitive intelligence category in G2, it lists 60 something competitors. out of those 10 focused on the enterprise like you guys. So how has the competitive landscape changed from your perspective, and do you have like a competitive strategy of like where you're trying to position yourself, and why would somebody go with you over other players?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So definitely more crowded, like every category. As soon as you prove that there is some value, more competitors come in, and some new ones either are starting up or they're just bigger ones are shifting and adding a module and saying they can do that. And I think that's going to continue with our announcement of our latest funding. We're going to hear more of that. Our approach has always been that knitting of collecting internal and external, curating machine and human, and distribution and enablement on the presentation layer. That those three things have always been our core, and we kind of just keep tripling down on those things. And still, nobody is doing all three really effectively. We've had our competitors chip away at maybe better intel collection or one present the data better, but nobody has connected all three in kind of the bar that we've set there. So that's still the combination of those three: find it, curate it, and get it out there so it's actually used, has been the differentiator. The other piece is that the content where you focus on the category, where you're educating everybody, has really resonated with people actually trusting the Klue brand to actually help them understand what they need to do, elevate their career, get a voice, show the organization what it means to be competitively enabled. So a lot of the free giveaways have actually resulted in a distinction from us being not just pounding the buy me now, but these are people that are providing value. So that's created a lift. And then we've leaned into kind of the authenticity of kind of some irreverence and humor that we try and bring to a lot of the marketing that we do. We try and be really real about, hey, we literally put in bloopers and our competitive enablement conference that we did. Like, just here's how we're introducing things and how we screwed up. And I think people really react well to the human reality of just trying to build this stuff. And so we try and really show that. And fundraising, we did a fun video when we raised a big fund round in the fall. And what goes through the mind of employees is like, awesome, I'm going to get a raise. I'm going to get a boat. And we actually did a video on that saying, like, this is what people think you get when you raise funding. And then this is the reality of what you need to do. And just leaning into kind of like Seinfeld, like truce and being human has, I think, helped make it real.
So according to TechCrunch, when you raised your latest B round, it was only like a year gap between the A round and B round, and you grew 3 times during that time period. So what's behind that growth? What's driving it?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of things. So one is there's a market maturity. So it's going from the handful of super early innovators. It's the front end of this curve. Like 99% of companies don't have a compete solution, but that early adopter is now kind of proliferating through the organization, and they're moving around. The average tenure in a company maybe is 2.5 years. And so they move to a different company and they bring with them this edge that they learned when they use Klue there. They're bringing Klue into that. I think we have a couple other venture funded competitors that are also making noise in the market. And so between us, there's more noise that says this is a viable advantage that companies can have. And we're not quite at the edge where people realize if they don't have it, it's like being the last house on the block without locks on your door and alarm. Like you don't want to be that house that everybody could walk into. So more and more houses on the block are getting alarms and locks, and that's how I see this competitive. More and more companies are getting a competitive enablement solution. And so if you're the company that doesn't have it, you're kind of at an understanding and insight loss compared to the salespeople that do have it. So if you've been a salesperson or a compete person at a company and you move over to another one and you don't have it, you immediately feel a little more vulnerable. So I think that's happening. I think there's more noise in the market that's happening. I think sales tech in general has kind of elevated in people's psyche. People are aware. And then the cold hard reality is it works. So like the data proves itself out. We've literally looked at cohorts where some people in the company adopted Klue, some people didn't. Cohort A has a higher lift in their win rates, in their time to close, and often even in the deal value. Not always, but often, where cohort B doesn't. And so even if adoption might be lower in a company, even if 30% adopted, if those 30% are closing and winning more deals at a higher value, then it becomes like, how do we get the rest to adopt that? And because we've seen that ROI directly attributed to usage of Klue, more and more companies are like, well, this is a no brainer. One or two wins in a dogfight deal pays for the software. So across 500 salespeople, can we tip a couple more dogfight deals? That math gets a lot easier to do when you see more case studies.
Well, let's talk more about the competition. So, from a traditional competitive a market perspective, is that strong competitors start positioning each other and pushing each other into different spaces. So, oh, you go into SMB and I go into enterprise. You mentioned that your tool does has a more, let's say, a comprehensive overview. Let's call it a full product strategy. So is it that based on what the other players in the category are doing, that kind of also impacts your product strategy, where like, oh, let's go all in with this complete solution thing, and also, oh, look, they're nibbling from the the bottom at the mark of the market, and so let's us go closer to the enterprise? Or how do you think about that?
I think it's always tempting to chase all aspects of the opportunities in your market. I think at different stages of your organization, you have to be very careful about how far you stretch that elastic band. So Klue has always been more geared for mid-market and enterprise. Last year was the first year we actually went downstream a little more and started to offer Klue to companies, maybe 200 employees to 500 instead of the larger companies. And it's where our major competitor tends to live, in that smaller side, despite their positioning on their website. That's where the cluster of their clients live. And we had great success there. And so for us, it was a very considered experiment 5 years after starting, or 4 years after starting the company, to start to move downstream. The system could produce a little more automated insight than it was something that required a pilot to steer the plane. There was a little more autopilot, maybe not quite drone, but a little more autopilot, which meant that a product marketer in a smaller company could do it in a couple hours a week and empower the rest of the org. So we looked at it from a technology standpoint and went, just let's not oversell what the product could do, which our competitors had done. And so we were able to go in and win a lot of business by saying, now we have the product that can do this. If this works for you, then this is a good one to look at. And I think the honesty of that product pledge was met with the reality of what it could do. And more clients kind of grafted onto that. So, Klue, I would say, look, we've been mid-market and enterprise. It's our sweet spot. We continue there in expansion with big companies. Dell went from, a handful of users to tens of thousands of users and broadening it out to its channel. That's our typical zone. The smaller companies were just starting to understand, and we're moving downstream very considerately after 4 years. So, if I think about, somebody on your show listening to this and thinking about how far they should extend, it's like, make sure you have the product that fits it, not just follow your competitors downstream or upstream. Enterprise demands SOC 2 compliance, permissions, and all these other work. Our competitors are starting to try and move upstream as we have more of those features too. So ultimately, if you're going to take a pile of venture funding and try and win the category, you're going to end up, up and down that ladder, but just do it very considerately when you have the right infrastructure, product, and money in place to kind of chase it. And we waited till 4 years to go slightly more downstream.
In your fundraising announcement, you said that most of that money is going towards product development. There are also voices on the market to say, hey, like winning on product is increasingly difficult, if not impossible. Yet you seem to be doubling down on product rather than, I don't know, brand. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I think it's, look, it was a $62 million round. And so, we're going to spend a disproportionate amount on product, mainly because there's two things that I think are happening on the product side, which I'll come back to. But speaking on the brand side, we're clearly going to be spending money on go-to-market and brand. We're going to be expanding more aggressively in Europe. We have 35 clients organically. We now have an Amsterdam office. We now have a London office. We're going to start to accelerate in MIA more so. And we're looking at different verticals. We've been strong in the tech vertical, but the financial services, insurance, manufacturing, CPG, retail, there's another bunch of verticals that are starting to open up for us. So we're gonna go to market for sure. But the brunt of product, why I say it's important is in our world, there's this big trend of machine learning that's going to crack the back of unstructured data. It's hard. It's an iterative process. Every year you get a little better at it, and it takes really expensive people to figure out how to crack the take raw intel and create insight problem. And so we've done enough manual people powered work now to know what needs to be made more automated. And that just takes money, like flat out money to do it, and experiments where this didn't work. Try that next experiment. So there's on the ML trend, it's just expensive and you got to invest in it because it's the long term moat. As our flywheel gets more and more companies in, as we understand more of what patterns work, we just become a better insight generation machine. But the second thing, and this is, I don't know if it's often overlooked, but you can't just live as a standalone tool. It's all about APIs and it's all about data traveling between tools now. The fight to be the tool that everybody uses only, I think is a fool's game. I think you've got to live in all sorts of other tools. Like I think Klue data should surface in a Gong call. It should surface in a Dooley note. It should surface in Salesforce or Slack. It should surface inside. We should supercharge Highspot or Seismic or Showpad. So from my point of view, like, yeah, I want people to come to Klue, but let the data live where the people want to live. And if they've got favorite tools, let it surface there. Product board, Gainsight, wherever those people want to be, let it live there. So we're spending a lot of money on integrations and connections into other ecosystems to supercharge those tools with compete content, because we're going to be the number one in providing killer compete content for their people.
The other players in your category, what have you done differently to succeed where they haven't? Like in retrospect, like what good have they done to overtake you, or what did you do what they didn't to get you where you are?
Oh, there's one secret. No, it's never one thing, as you know, Pep. It's I think broadly the things that you do at the core of it, you have to have a great product. And as you said, over time, products start to look pretty similar. UI, there's fundamentals on your architecture and your UI that are going to attract over time or detract over time. And so massive investments on what that UI looks like, what it feels like as you navigate through it. Does it feel simple? Does it not? And the biggest compliment is it just works. So I still think there's differences in UI and how that, and in our system, how you can surface insight. So product, no question, there's a differentiation there, and fundamental architecture, fundamental approach. We came at it more from the enablement side than the searchable database side. That you can see all the way through the product. So I can't not acknowledge the product differentiation. But the other pieces were finding our brand voice, not being afraid to open up our employee brands, as an example. Like we actually encourage every single person that joins Klue to be open about what it's like to work at Klue. What are the challenges? What are the ups and downs? We've had some real hammer shots from our employees of like, this was really not great. Our benefits up until last year were free pepper. We didn't have a benefits program. Like literally you could have free pepper or salt. That was our benefits. And so that was an issue, but we try and address it over time, and we just try and be open about it. And so I think more and more clients and companies want a great product, first of all, that solves their needs, but they also want to deal with a company that they trust, that has the integrity, that's authentic, that's real, that they feel like they can go beneath the veneer and say, this is somebody that's going to stick up for me or not. I believe and I trust in them, and I can put my career in their hands, that they're going to, if I'm in trouble, come to my rescue. And if you can't have the trust, then I don't think you get that. And how do you build the trust? It's being authentic and honest and having integrity with every interaction, be that a LinkedIn post, be that a sales interaction, be that a promise that your product can do or can't do. And I think a lot of companies just get tripped up in like trying to be too much of what they are instead of acknowledging what they're not. And we try and be very clear about that, both in terms of our company, employees, in terms of our product, and what we can offer to the market in terms of content.
My final question is about moats. You know, you guys are investing heavily in product and so on. You want to stay, you want to be around probably 10 years from now as well, become the category king, undisputed king. So how are you, what kind of decisions are you making in terms of product and brand and other things to build moats around you?
So the number one thing, and this sounds obvious, is like if we can't help our clients be amazing in what they're doing, full stop, then you can't build a moat. And what's that mean? That means like the product needs to save them time. The product needs to make them look good. The product needs to solve a very clear problem. And then any product is going to have rough edges. So the next layer beyond that is going to be the services team that's going to solve the problem that they had, that the data that they deleted that went missing, we find, that the presentation that they need to put together, we can scramble to help with. There's a softness that on the edges of a product that are people that are going to be real, that are going to have your back. And so there's a support layer, not to underestimate those people. And we're investing significantly in the services to make sure that these people are helping our clients. But at the root of it, it's how do I help our clients? That's a great product. That's a great UI. That's great machine learning and insights. That's integrating it in other products. Second is the people side. And then third is I do think elevating this category. I think the biggest moat is if we can help establish competitive enablement as a clear category, build up that value prop for everybody that's doing this work inside of a client organization, and that we could see somebody that starts as a competitive enablement manager end up as CEO one day, or have what is now hundreds of jobs turn into hundreds of thousands of jobs in competitive enablement. If we can help lift the whole category, then I think we lift with it. And if we're doing the right job, we're at the top of that water tide.
Boom.